Let's take a look at the Hot Toggles tool. I'm opening up an example drawing here, and I'd like you to take note of a few settings. I've entered an input scale factor and computed its inverse output scale factor. I've set a point protection tolerance of 5 thousandths, and you'll see down the bottom that there's a warning that there's an issue with scale factors, and I'm going to leave it in that state. I'll accept those settings. And I want to draw your attention to the Hot Toggles dialog in the top right corner. This is a dialog that's placed in a handy location because you're frequently going and interacting with this dialog when you're performing CocoCalcs. If you happen to turn it off, you can find it back on the MS Tools ribbon and you can turn it on. Let's go through the different settings. So currently you can see that point protection is off. And what that means is that if I perform an edit on a point in my database, then it'll simply move, any linked entities will be shifted, and nothing else will happen. I'll undo that, and I'll turn point protection back on. And now when I perform that same edit, point protection notices that the point has moved more than the minimum 5 thousandths that we've already set, and it asks for me to approve that overwrite. There, it moves again, same result. Now, log file output is toggled off, but I'm going to toggle it back on, and we'll come back to that in a minute so that we can see what the result is. Let's move on to input scale. Now you noted that I had an input scale stored with this project, and now that I've toggled it on, it will be applied when I perform CocoCalcs and various other operations. So let me start up Cogo, and let's Cogo in a line from point 55 in the drawing. I'll give it the same direction as this 5032 to 55 direction. And I'll manually input an exact distance of 1000. You can see that a scale factor was applied in computing the point, and I'll tell it to create a new point 5037. And let's have a look at how the point is labeled. So what's happened is I've input a ground distance of 1000 feet, and the scale factor was used to compute a grid distance of 999.95 feet. And that's what will happen when I've got input scale checked on. Now, that's not normally what you'd want to do though. Normally you want to compute your points at grid, and you'd like your drawing labels to reflect ground distance. And that's why I'd have left my job defaults with that warning about scale factors, because what that warning was pointing out is that if I go into my advanced settings, that the 5 labeling styles that are stored with this drawing are just applying a scale factor of 1 right now. If I pick on apply to all label defaults, it'll configure the label styles the way you would conventionally want them. And now if I refresh my drawing by performing a rescale, it's going to recompute the labels with the scale factor applied so that we see ground distances throughout the drawing. And so we haven't moved any points, but we've just updated the distance labels. Now let's have a look at what happens when I open up one of the CAD lines dialogs. So notice how even though I've got a ground distance labeled, I've got a grid distance reflecting the distance between points within the database. It would be handy if we had a scaled horizontal distance. And if I check on output scale, now the dialog pops up, and you can see that we've got kind of a dual scale factor set up, so that, and this feature will appear in a lot of the different microsurvey query dialogs. Okay, on to the purpose of the Draw Lines Curves checkbox. And so you've noticed that I've had the option to draw lines, label distances, label bearings turned on, and when we kogoed in this one line, it automatically did it. So let's see what happens if I turn that option off. Start Kogo again. Open 5037. Plus plus repeats the azimuth input. Plus plus repeats the distance input. And I'll create a new point called 5038. And when we zoom back, we can see that it's computed that point according to the distances, but it hasn't drawn anything. Okay, further down, the next point feature. So the next point feature allows you to easily set a starting point for various operations that generate one or multiple points. And so I'll set it at 5,000, or actually let's go to a new point range. Let's set it to 6,000. Just pick on refresh. And I'll use the Add Points to Objects tool. And I'm just going to add some points to the setback line here. So we'll start it. Notice how it's taken 6,000 from the hot toggles dialog. And I'll input a description of right-of-way. And then I can just pick three lines and a curve, hit enter. Okay, so now the points are created. The AutoMap has determined how the label is going to be, and it's used point 6,000 up, and it's also augmented the hot toggles dialog. So that's what the next point function will do. And last thing for me to show you is log file output. So notice how I had that checked on while I was doing those Kogo calcs. If I switch over to MS Tools, I can open up the log file. And here we've got a record of all the Kogo input. Thanks for your interest in this topic, and hope you'll join us for more videos.